Greetings and welcome to another edition of The Pedalshift Project. The Pedalshift Project is a series of conversations, thoughts, and experiments around the bike touring lifestyle. From tips and tricks to ideas on how to ride your ride, let's shrink the world by bike. Show notes and more are available at pedalshift.net/213, and you can email the show at pedalshift@pedalshift.net or call the voicemail hotline at 202-930-1109 and check Pedalshift out on all the socials as well. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 213th edition of the Pedalshift Project. My name's Tim Mooney. Thanks so much for joining us on this edition of the show. At the top here, we're going to do our usual bit of housekeeping, and I thought I would start by sharing a little bit of what I've been doing this week, and that is we're back out in West Virginia, and I've been doing some morning rides on the C&O and the Western Maryland Rail Trail. And what's been fun about that is I feel like that one of the things that got taken away as part of gestures broadly all of this was my morning commute. I would ride a very short distance from our place in DC to my office in DC. It was literally just blocks, not long, but I would do that back and forth essentially 4 times. I would go there in the morning, come back at lunch, go back after lunch, and then come back at the end of the day. So it would be 4 times. And, you add it all up and it's a short commute, but it was a commute. And I realized as sort of the waistline got a little bit bigger for a lot of reasons, but part of it I think was also I just wasn't as active. Just that daily bit of activity really, I think, made a big difference for me. And I'm not even sure if I've mentioned this on the show or not, but I've been really kind of missing all of that. One of the challenges about being in West Virginia, which we've been doing more of, is that while it's certainly bikeable out here, I mean, these are country roads and whatnot, the hills are just stunning. One of my neighbors was on Nextdoor recently and said that the hill by his place is a 14% grade. I'm here to tell you, for just like a bopping around kind of a thing, I'm just not loving 14% grades that come out of nowhere and are like all over the place. So, as a result, I don't bike in the immediate area around where I'm at. So but at the same time, I don't like driving with my bike to a place to ride until I've gotten over that. And so this week I've gotten over it a little bit. It takes about 20 to 25 minutes to drive to Hancock from here. And at Hancock, I've got 2 really awesome trails, the C&O and the Western Maryland Rail Trail, and they run parallel with each other. And the last few mornings, I've gotten up a little extra early. Not my best look, I'm here to tell you. Not really big on the mornings, but I've been getting up an extra hour and a half early, and I drive out there and I do a 45-minute ride. I basically do a touch over 7 miles, and I've been doing it on the little clown bike on the Brompton, and I've done it both on the Western Maryland Rail Trail and on the C&O. Why am I sharing this all with you? Well, last week, as you may recall, I was sort of scratching my head over whether or not I wasn't sure if there is less, the same, or more touring on the C&O than in past years. And just, data point, this is not dispositive by any stretch of the imagination. I would expect to see bike tourists to be in Hancock just because of how it's spaced out relative to the rest of the trail. So I have not seen anybody camping on either of the 2 mornings at either the one campground that's immediately to the west of town or at the C&O bunkhouse, which is a big time place for people to camp out. Now, I'm not 100% sure, as I sit here thinking about it now, if the bunkhouse is actually open. I think it is. My recollection is that it is. And I think you pay them $10, and I think there's an outdoor shower. I've actually never stayed there, mainly because obviously if I want amenities, I'm literally 7 miles away by bike. Actually, I'm more than that. I'd have to go down the trail and then 7 miles away. But in any event, I would tend to stay at the cabin, or if I want to camp, I'll camp elsewhere and not pay $10 for it. So, I take this with a big grain of salt that this is somehow saying anything about the number of folks who are touring the C&O right now. It's early in the week, and I'm only looking at 2 potential spots where there are at least 4 or 5, and I'm not even talking about wild camping opportunities in that area. So open question still. I'd be curious if you're on the C&O this summer and you're touring, if you, what's your take on the touring traffic, for what it's worth? I also wanted to say here in the housekeeping segment, thank you for the feedback on touring during COVID. I sort of was reluctant to do the episode because I felt like going into all of this when we were doing the happy hours with the folks from Sprocket Podcast. There seemed to be some reluctance amongst folks to talk about it. It's like, oh, we're just smothered in all of this and I can't take it anymore. And I get that. But at the same time, I think, this is the reality, and this is a show about bike touring, and this is definitely impacting bike touring. So I'm glad I covered it because I've been getting some nice feedback. It seems like the consensus out there is that you all are canceling your bigger tours and you're keeping things local. I'm sure there's somebody who's listening to me right now going, yo, I'm doing a big tour. And that's fine. I mean, my big thing, as you heard, was keep it safe, keep it responsible, and I'm on your side on this. I think for me, and my recommendation is, look, there are lots of opportunities wherever you are, even if you're in a big city, to do something that's bike toury, and keep it on the local side, keep it on the smaller side. There's lots to explore in our own backyards. I'm really, really fortunate that I've got a really nice backyard with the C&O and with the Western Maryland Rail Trail and all that I've got available to me. But as I mentioned on the show, there's lots of different opportunities there. I'm largely with staying local, but as we're going to be talking about, the start and finish of my next tour is arguably at the very edge of my home territory, and I'll be very much going outside of that home territory. So, I think that you have to assess what's available to you. And that is, I think, the place where I'm at least right now, under these conditions. And as we have seen, conditions change quite a bit. And different regions will be bad and then good. And different regions will be good and then very bad. So it depends a lot on where you're at. And if you're listening to me from outside of the United States, chances are you're doing better than we are right now. So depends on where you are, of course. Conditions vary all over the place. Speaking of my next tour, let's just jump right into it. I'll have to confess, I was thinking about taking another week off. Next week is a best of episode, and it's a good one. It's about cycling during the heat, because my God, it's hot around here. It's been July in this region has had more 90-degree days than any other July in recorded history. So hot, hot, hot. But I'm going to be biking in it anyways. And so as a result, the best of is about cycling in the heat. I was thinking about doing 2 best ofs in a row because I was fresh out of ideas, quite frankly. And then I thought about it for a second. And as I was kind of noodling around with all of the things and all of the planning for this Gap 4x44 loop, I thought, you know what? That's kind of an episode right there, because I have done prep episodes in the past before. And as it turns out, got a fair amount to talk about, just to sort of set the table, let you all know what I'm thinking about as I'm going into this. This is, in a sense, a companion episode to the last episode, because this is the fruition of some of my planning having to do with my point of view on making this a very low to no contact kind of route. I guess you can't call this a no contact tour, because I'm absolutely going to have to resupply at least once and maybe a couple of times. And we'll talk a little bit about that as we go along here. So in no particular order, I just sort of throwing some bullet points at you as I go along here. First point that I wanted to raise about this Gap 4x44 loop. By the way, if you missed last episode and don't want to go back, that's where I revealed it. What I'm going to be doing is a ride on my main touring bike, which is freshly reconstructed from the dead. And it's going to be starting in Cumberland, Maryland, which is about an hour-long drive away from here. We'll be dropped off by my partner, so we'll be, safe and ensconced in our own private vehicle. Dropped off there. I'll start and end there, so I'm not going to be taking any non-private transit of any kind, barring emergencies, and I talked about that last episode. So it's going to be averaging 44 miles a day over 4 days, and going all the way out to Connellsville, Pennsylvania, and back. And this will be the first time in memory that I think, this will be the first time that I've ever done the Gap in this kind of a way. And the fun part about it is just to start and end in Cumberland means I get to go up the big hill and down the big hill. So that's kind of fun. As a result of a variety of different planning, I considered going lighter and hammock only. I am intrigued because of the puncture that I got in my sleeping pad, which I've now since repaired during that overnight with my Brompton. I slept that night in my kind of cheapo hammock, and I had a perfectly fine night's sleep. I'm not a great sleeper in hammocks, as it turns out. If you were really with me for a long time with the show, I had a Hennessy hammock for more than a minute, and eventually ended up selling it because I just wasn't enamored with it. I'm much more of a tent person, and I know you hammock folks, you're deep into your hammocks, and I respect you. But after selling it, I was kind of like, I'm never going to get a hammock again. And then I slept in the hammock, and I was like, you know what? It's pretty light, and it's pretty dope, and it's pretty cool to like have to not take as much stuff with you. So I've been shopping, in my usual like relentlessly planning way, looking at a variety of different styles of camping hammocks. And in the end, when all is said and done, because I don't feel like making a big purchase like that right now, and it's not that much money in the grand scheme of things, but I decided I've got a tent, I've got my hammock, I'm just going to bring them both. I'm going to go fully loaded and not try to do the modified bike packy style that I was thinking about. So I'm going to bring the tent, I'll bring the hammock, I'll sleep in the most comfortable situation that is available to me. There may be situations in my potential stealth camping sites where, frankly, a tent is just not going to be possible in the very hilly areas around Rockwood, Pennsylvania, and in those environs. Frankly, off of the Gap, there's just not a lot of opportunity to throw out a tent in any way that's stealthy, like at all. I think there might be a few spots where there might be, but in that case, I would absolutely have to be thinking about hammock. So I'm going to bring the hammock as sort of if I choose to do a wild night or wild camping or a stealth camping situation, but it's going to be that same cheap one that I bought ages ago as sort of like a lark. And this $20 hammock has served me quite well. One of those Amazon specials, I don't even know what the brand of it is. It's those same parachute, single layer, nothing real special about it. So that's what I'm going to do from a sleeping perspective. My biggest challenge, I think, on this tour, and I mentioned the heat, is water. Unlike the C&O, which if you've listened to the show or if you've done any research on the C&O's got water pumps every 5 miles, every single one of those campsites. Sometimes it's a little more than 5 miles between them, but you get the idea. There's a good potable water source that is frequently available to you on the trail. You do not have to deviate from the trail to get your water. If you don't want to do that, you've got the opportunity to go down to the Potomac River, fill up, and to filter your water if you've got a filter. Okay. The Gap doesn't have that, not on trail at least. There's a few places where you're going to be able to get it on trail, but those are often municipal water sources. And frankly, in the area that I'm going to be going, there's only one spot that I can think of outside of Cumberland. If memory serves, there is a water fountain near Frostburg. And it's good that it's there because Frostburg is up this enormous freaking hill. Speaking of 14% grades, it's probably more than that. So I don't like to go into Frostburg for anything. But the consequence of that is that you have to go off trail if you want to get water. Also throw in, hello COVID era, right? Municipal water fountains, in my experience, where I've gone in a variety of places, whether that's DC, whether that's Cumberland, whether that is, I'm trying to think of another town, Brunswick, all of them shut off. They are not on at all for obvious reasons. They don't want public water sources and people getting their COVID all over, or their coronavirus all over it, and worrying about spread that way. So that is going to be something that's tough. The other thing is that river access, while I'll be going along the Castleman River for a good chunk of the Gap Trail, that river is not easy to get to from the Gap. It's often down a very steep incline. There are a few points here and there where you've got access, but it's not real easy. Better access to the river in Ohiopyle, but in Ohiopyle, there's services. There's places where I could go get water. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to carry a ton of water with me. Again, just to minimize the issues. It's going to be hot, and I'm going to have situations where I'm not going to have easy access to water. So I'm going to bring my big water tank, which I've got with me now. I hadn't had that before. I believe it's either 3 or 4 liters. I'm also going to be carrying several half-liter bottles just to be safe. so that I'm carrying a lot with me so that I don't have to, sip my water or ration it. When it's this hot, it's just too dangerous to do that. As I mentioned, the heat index has been super high lately, well over 100 degrees. So I'm going to have to make the assumption that it's going to be the same when I go on this tour. So water, biggest challenge that I've got when I am going through towns, especially in the Rockport area, which is where I'm going to be camping. There is a store there, so it's possible I may need to water up and may need to go to that store when I would generally prefer not to, given all of the situations that we've got right now. If I am going to go into the store, then I've got the opportunity to resupply with snacks or food or anything like that if I need to. But my plan is to try to have the food that I need for the first half of the tour with me, and then I resupply halfway through. Speaking of food, I'm toying with not bringing a stove for this trip. Now, I've done that before with some success, and it's fine. When it's hot outside, frankly, even when it cools down at night, I'm not super stoked to boil up water and make something hot. It's just not something I necessarily need. I've also been using the cold brewing technique that I developed last year. I think I'm going to continue that this year and do that. So that means I don't need to boil water for anything. We all know that I love me some coffee. So if I'm not going to need to boil water for coffee and I don't want to eat hot food, ta-da, no need for the stove. So cold soaking, eating whole foods, that's very good. And then occasionally stuff from cans or pre-prepared food, which can be not so bad for me, but much more tasty. I think I'd mentioned that my resupply point is going to be in Connellsville. One of the great spots on the entire Gap Trail is the Adirondack Shelters that are literally at the edge of town. They're right on the trail. And most importantly, they are right next to a Martin's grocery store, which is really well stocked and really good. I also, as a sidebar, Martin's is also the local grocery store here in West Virginia. I really liked how they've approached COVID era safety. They were ahead of the curve in these regions for asking folks to wear masks, and they're very good about how they have things separated. I don't know if that's going to be the same in Connellsville, but I know from a corporate level, their corporate rules seem to be in line with how I'm living my life. So I like the fact that it's a store that I know what their rules are going to be. So that's really quite good. And I'm happy that that's the case. I don't know what the situation is going to be in other places and other towns, but frankly, there's not a lot in between that's going to be really available. I've got Myersdale, which is a possibility early on in the trip. I've got Rockwood, excuse me. I always do that. I always call it Rockport. It's Rockwood, which is going to be near where I'm going to be staying the first night and third night. But really, I think Connellsville and of course, Ohiopyle. Did I mention Ohiopyle? There's a ton of possibilities there, but not grocery style possibilities. And again, I would really like to avoid cafes and things like that if I can. I'll do it if I need to, but I'm going to try to avoid that. I'm going to try, I think, especially on the first night into the second night, a cold bag. And I think that that's been a really helpful thing for me on these hot rides that I've been doing. And of course, I did that for the overnight with the Brompton on the C&O, and you heard all about that. What really, really worked for that was I'll prepare a cold brew for the morning of day 2, and I'll freeze that rock hard. I'll also throw at least a half-liter water bottle, again, frozen rock hard. Those will be the 2 cold sources that go in it. And then it goes into it's basically glorified bubble wrap. It's the stuff that they send a lot of the meal kits and stuff like that Kimberly and I have been eating or subscribing to during all of this. And so what that'll do is that'll keep whatever else I have in there cold. Might be a nice chilled beverage. It might be something that I would prefer to keep cold for purposes of eating later, but keeping things cool, I think that would be fantastic. So that gets me also a cold coffee in the morning. That also gives me some cold water potentially in the morning. Again, really nice to have, even if I just drink the cold water at the end of my day. To have something really cold like that would be really good at the end of day 1. Day 2, I've got my coffee, and what I can do is at the end of day 2, I'll be in Connellsville, which will mean I can resupply there. I could conceivably get a bag of ice or do my old trick with the frozen veggies and kind of continue the cold bag kind of scenario. We'll see what I decide on. By that point, after cycling in the heat for a couple of days, usually I acclimatize to it, so I don't know if I'll continue the cold bag after that, but for the first night into the second, I think that'll be a really helpful thing. I'm going to limit the clothing. I think I say this every time. I mean, look, I talk a big game, but I tend to wear the exact same stuff that I wear on day 1 and day 2, day 3. Well, maybe not day 3 and day 4. So I may bring at least a couple change or one change of clothes, but I'm not going to go too crazy with that. I think that if there's rain in the forecast, I think I'm just going to get rained on. I will bring my jacket, but frankly, with the temperatures like this, I think that if I get rained on, it'll actually be perfectly okay by me. So I'll probably bring a few changes of underwear, of course, for the 4 days of riding, but maybe won't bring more than one pair of pants with me that are I can zip off and make into shorts if I really want to, and of course I'll have my sleep kit for my sleep clothing, but beyond that, maybe only a couple of shirts, for instance. That's basically what I'm going to do. I will bring at least 3 masks with me. Now, I've been, from the very beginning of all of this, using those gaiter style masks, which are essentially those tubes of fabric that you kind of pull over your neck. I had gotten those for this year for neck protection, for keeping the sun off the back of my neck, and well, as it turns out, we have other uses for them nowadays. Am I right? I am, however, also I have ordered, and in fact, it may even be delivered today, one of those loop around the ear style masks that are, I think, the more common style of masks. I think that's going to be the one that I use in camp. Again, I like to have a set of clothing that I get out of my tour clothing for the day that I can walk around in camp. Same deal with the mask as well. I think I'll have a mask that I'll have around my neck during the day, so that I can pull up and pull down as necessary. And then the one that kind of goes over the nose and the ears and whatnot. Everything goes over the nose for all of these masks, but the elastic one that goes around the ears, I think that's going to be the one that I wear in camp. So I mentioned that my bicycle, Sequoia Sempervirens, for you old school folks who still call my bike by that name. I don't really call it Sequoia much anymore, but I think I still will. Perhaps maybe I should bring that back. This is my REI bike that has been around, has been up and down the Pacific Coast with me. It has been the Katy Trail, the Erie Canal, it's been all over the place. Unfortunately, the fork had to go up to the fork farm where it's going to laugh and run and play with other bicycle forks. The sad thing is that I really wish I could have gotten that fork. I would have done something with it, maybe artistically, but in any event, old bike, new fork. It rides like a champ now that it's been reconstructed. The new fork is black, and the rest of the bike, if you've seen pictures of it, is mostly brown and kind of cream colored. Not exactly my colors, but I kind of like the fact that it's kind of Frankenstein-y now. It's got some character to it. So I think that's kind of okay by me. I'm glad I've done the whole Gap Trail before this, but I think when I'm in Connellsville, I can predict that I'm going to miss completing those last 62 miles of that western third of the Gap all the way going to Pittsburgh. Given that I've done the entire C&O in pieces this year, I have a funny feeling that I will perhaps, if I can, try to complete that last western third of the Gap at some point later in the year, perhaps in the fall, if things quiet down or if things work out. If things are fine in western Pennsylvania, then maybe I will consider doing that. That, of course, is all to be determined. I am not planning much more than a few weeks in advance, and I don't think too many folks in this area are as well. I wanted to mention that next week's show, as I talked about before, it's going to be the August Best Of. It's going to be featuring episode number 87087 on hot weather touring, in case we get any hot weather. I repeat that to you again because that's part of the schedule for what's coming up in the month of August. The Gap 4x44 Loop Tour Journal will start and drop August 13th at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, as every Thursday, and that's going to get us into Labor Day and the September Best Of, to be determined. I don't know if I'm going to do all of these in a row. It'll probably be 4 episodes. I may do 3 episodes, the September Best Of, and then complete it with the 4th episode in September. But either way, this is going to get us into September, so I'm really excited to do this ride. I'm really excited, as always, to share this with all of you, especially for those of you who are jonesing to get out and do a bike tour and just don't have the opportunity to do it, whether it's work related, whether it's funds related, whether it's your compromised immune system and you don't really want to risk it. In some small way, I hope that this is giving you some little taste of adventure, and I'm super stoked to be bringing everybody along. Thank you so much for listening, and thank you also for supporting the show. And as always, we like to close out the show with a special shout out to the Pedalshift Society. Because of support from listeners like you, Pedalshift is a weekly bicycle touring podcast with a global community, expanding into live shows and covering new tours like the Kessel Run. If you like what you hear, you can support the show for $5, $2, or even $1 a month. And there's one-shot and annual options. If you're not into the small monthly thing, check it all out at pedalshift.net/society. On to the society. Kimberly Wilson, Caleb Jenkinson, Cameron Lean, Andrew McGregor, Michael Hart, Keith Nagel, Brock Didis, Thomas Skadow, Marco Lowe, Terrence Manson, Harry Telgadis, Chris Barron, Mark Van Ram, Brad Hipwell, Stuart Buchan, Mr. T, Nathan Poulton, Stephen Dickerson, Vince LaGreco, Cody Florchinger, Tom Beninati, Greg Braithwaite, Sandy Pizzio, Jeff Muster, Seth Pollock, Joseph Quinn, Byron Patterson, Joachim Robert, Ray Jackson, Jeff Fry, Kenny Mikey, Lisa Hart, John Denkler, Steve Henkel, Miguel Quinones, Alejandro Aviles Reyes, Keith Spangler, Greg Towner, Dan Gebhardt, Jody Zeranin, Lucas Barwick, Michael Baker, Brian Bechtal, Reinhard Biggle, Greg Middlemas, Connie Moore, William Gothman, Brian Benton, Joan Churchill, Mike Bender, Rick Weinberg, Billy Crafton, Gary Matushak, Greg Latois Lopez, James Sloan, Jonathan Dillard, John Funk, Tom Bilch, Ronald Piroli, Dave Roll, Brian Hafner, Misha LeBlanc, Ari Messinger, David Grutke, Wally Estrella, Sue Reinert, John Lecko, Stephen Granada, Philip Mueller, Robert Lackey, Dominic Carroll, Jackie McCulloch, John Hickman, Jack Smith, Carl Presso, David Neves, Patty Louise, Terry Fitzgerald, Peter Steinmetz, Timothy Fitzpatrick, Dave Fletcher, James Stratakis, and David Neves. And thanks to all past and anonymous members for making this show happen. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.